Joe talks about Joe. And now, your host, Joe Slepsky.
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to Joe on Joe Illustrated. That's right. This is Joe on Joe Illustrated, the patron-only podcast where we break into and break down every single issue of G.I. Joe, a Real American Hero, the comic book. Now, normally, our Joe on Joe Illustrated issues are only available via Patreon, but every 5 issues we're releasing through the general feed, and so that's why you're hearing this today. I hope you guys enjoy it, and if you do, consider going over to Patreon/Joe on Joe Pod and check out what you can do to become a member and help support the Joe on Joe podcast. For $1 a month, you can help support the show, and you get access to all the back catalog. And for $3, you get full access to the Joe on Joe Illustrated, which is this very podcast right here. Today is issue number 10. I'm very excited about it. In my opinion, it is the start of the mythos. This is the issue where everything really kicks into high gear. We had a little taste of it when they fought the Springfield Marching Band a few issues back, but this time the Joes actually go to Springfield. And we get the start of Snake Eyes' origin. We get Dr. Venom is introduced. There is a whole lot of great stuff that happens in this single issue. So I'm really excited to dig into it. Remember, if you're on the internet, find me at Joe on Joe Pod. That's on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. And, follow me. We just finished doing some Choose Your Own Adventure videos on Facebook. So I'm going to be doing more of those in the coming weeks. So follow me on Facebook, and you never know when a new adventure might start. So that's me reading a chapter and then you making the choice. And the next day I read your choice and we see where we go. And since this is the start of the mythos in my world, it's issue number 10. I think it's a very special issue. We are going to tackle Larry Hama today. We're going to talk about Larry. I know we've talked previously, we've talked about Mike Vosberg, we've talked about Chick Stone, we've talked about Herb Trimpe, and a bunch of the other inkers and artists and creators on here. Well, now it's Larry's turn in the hot seat. And if you stay tuned to the end of this episode, you will hear my exclusive Joe on Joe interview with Larry Hama that I did at the Wondercon just a few weeks ago. It's a great interview, I think. Not from me. On my side of the fence, but from Larry. He opened up, talked about what the Joes meant to him, talked about just his life, his favorite things. It's a quick 10-minute foray into the world of Larry Hama. I couldn't be more appreciative. So Larry, if you hear this, thank you so very much. We love your work, and we appreciate you so much. Hopefully, when we go over your biography today, hopefully we get everything right. Let's hope we don't screw anything up. But if I do, feel free to reach out. Send me an email to joeonjoepod@gmail.com. Let me know what you think of the show. And so we start every episode of Joe on Joe Illustrated looking at the comic books that were also on the rack during the month of the issue. We like to call that segment
You Were Saying.
So we'll start with DC Comics. Now, as we talked in some of our previous episodes, DC was struggling a little bit during this era. This is, of course, it's April of 1983. We're 2 years away from Crisis on Infinite Earths, which literally rebooted their whole universe. So you could imagine that at the time, 2 years leading up, this is when they're thinking about it. This is, in about a year or so, they'll start creating it and putting everything together. There's a reason for that, because the DC line wasn't really that strong. This month it's not the first appearance, but this is an exciting book. It's issue 1 of the Omega Men. They would be a cosmic super team set in space. They would show up over the years. They had a Tom King series that was excellent. They've been used. They're kind of fan favorites, is what I would say. Omega Men are fan favorites. They've got a small but loyal following. They show up every few years. They pop up and then they're kind of discarded. They've never really broken through the mainstream. Like, they're more obscure. And I love Legion of Superheroes. They're my favorite team in the world. But they're more obscure than Legion, and most people don't know the Legion. Most non-comic book readers don't know the Legion, so the Omega Men is a real stretch. However, their series was really solid, and in just a few short months, they would introduce Lobo. That's who he got his start in the pages of the Omega Men. So it's an important book, and it's very cool. Issue number 1 hit the stands this month. Swamp Thing is about maybe a year away from Alan Moore, maybe 7, 8, 9 months away from Alan Moore. Warlord, the world's finest, is chugs along. Wonder Woman, she just celebrated her 300th, so we're on issue 302. Everything's just kind of in the middle of the road. The Titans, are still enjoying the Marv Wolfman and George Perez era, which is always an important era. Tara joined the team this month. And over in Legion of Superheroes, we've got a preview of a little book called Amethyst, Princess of Gemworld, which is a sorcery. I wouldn't say even sword and sorcery book. It's more of a sorcery book that DC put out. They've recently tried to relaunch it with the New 52. It was created by Dan Mishkin, Gary Cohn, and Early Colin. And it was about a teenage girl who discovers that she's actually, she's an Earth girl, but she's actually an orphan princess of the world Amethyst and all the magical houses. It's kind of like Harry Potter, where everyone has their house and each house is a different thing. In this world, all the houses are different gemstones. It's a really cool concept. It's a fun comic book. They had a few mini series back in the day, and they brought her back. I think they did some animation work with her relatively recently, but you get a preview of it in the pages of Legion of Superheroes 298. Here's something exciting. Killer Croc made his first appearance this month in Batman 358 and again over in Detective 525. Carried over. Technically, his first technical appearance was a cameo a couple issues earlier in Detective, but his full appearance was over in Batman in 358, and Killer Croc has gone on to become a member of Suicide Squad. He was featured heavily on the Batman animated series. Waylon Jones is he has that rare genetic condition that gives him a crocodile appearance. They've made him much more animalistic over the years. Originally, he was just like a human with like a crocodile skin and kind of a freak, but now he's like more a little straight up mutant these days, the way they depict him, especially in the Arkham Asylum games, which he just looked fantastic in if you ever played those games. So that's probably the biggest stuff coming out of DC this month. Now let's say, hey, Marvel Comics.
You were saying?
A relatively strong month for Marvel. Nothing really great to write home about, but we get some strong entries here. We've got Uncanny X-Men 168. It's Paul Smith continuing his run with Chris Claremont. That's a legendary run. Over in Spider-Man, last time we had the first appearance of the Hobgoblin, and so today the Hobgoblin arc continues. You know I'm a big fan of the Roger Stern Spider-Man stuff. Some of the best stuff. Over in Thor, we are a scant 7 months away from the debut of Walter Simonson, which is very exciting and actually leads me into my favorite Marvel book of the whole month. It is Marvel graphic novel, The Star Slammers. This is a Walter Simonson pet project. It's something that he worked on, I believe, all the way back in his college art school days. It's a story of these intergalactic, the Star Slammers. They're these intergalactic like peacekeepers. And Walt has picked up that story over the years in multiple publishers. So this came out of Marvel. He did a series. I want to say he did a series with Dark Horse under the Legend imprint or Bravura Comics maybe. Recently, I think IDW published some Star Slammer stuff. What I really I love it because it's Walter Simonson, and it's Walter Simonson doing Cosmic, which is fantastic. His Star Slammers are these intergalactic kind of peacekeepers. They wear these gigantic like suits of armor that would make any of the with armor pads that would make the Image guys blush, but they're drawn well. And he tells this kind of epic story that doesn't really have a through line, but just always picks up as if they've been having these adventures ongoing, if that makes sense. So it's not like a show like Babylon 5 where there's a set story and we go from point A to point B and here's the full story. It's like every time Walt chooses to tell a Star Slammer story, it's been a few years or the characters have moved on a little bit, but you don't really get what's happened in the interim. You just get the guts of that story and they move on. It's a really cool concept. If you have the opportunity to pick up the Marvel Star Slammers graphic novel, please do so. Simonson's my favorite artist of all time, so of course that's going to get my number one slot this month for Marvel Comics. You were saying we also got a fun book called Obnoxio the Clown versus the X-Men. And the reason we bring up Obnoxio the Clown versus the X-Men is Obnoxio was a kind of a mascot, crazy, obnoxious, drunk, cigar-smoking clown that appeared in the Marvel Comics humor magazine Crazy. And he was created by Larry Hama. And Obnoxio is kind of like, it's like he's got a little bit of Homie the Clown. from, if you guys remember Homie the Clown from In Living Color. He's got a fair amount of that in him. And in this issue, which is Alan Kupperberg, written, penciled, inked, etc., it was edited by Larry, and Obnoxio has a run-in with the X-Men. It's a silly book. It doesn't fetch much on the back issue, but it's if you're an X-Men completist, this is the kind of book that you need to have in your collection. It's very fun. For any Jim Henson fans out there, the Dark Crystal #1 hit the stands this month. That's exciting. Over on Crazy, Obnoxio is on the cover of Crazy. And Crazy, of course, was Marvel's answer to Mad Magazine. They were really trying to break into that magazine market. It wouldn't last very long. John Byrne continues over on the Fantastic Four. Marvel Age #1 hit the stands. Now, Marvel Age was a promotional comic, and it was a way. Here's how big Marvel Comics was. They got you to give them 25 cents for an entire comic book that only promoted their own comic books to get you excited about buying more comic books from Marvel Comics. That's how popular Marvel Comics was. The cover is of Crystar. And Marvel would do the Saga of Crystar, the Warrior comic book. It's a Walter Simonson cover, so you know it's gorgeous. And Marvel Age ran 100 and so issues. It ran for quite a long time, and we were paying money to read about. Well, we kind of do it today. If you read the Diamond previews, there's a Marvel supplement that if you buy the regular previews, you get the supplement for free. But if you just want to buy the Marvel one, it costs you like $1.25. So that's how much people love comics. That's how clued in people want to be. Now, Marvel Age would have a lot of behind the scenes stories and a lot of creator interviews and things like that. It's a pretty cool comic. I had a bunch of issues, and I've really had a comprehensive collection of it. It's weird when you try to go back and reread it. You really got to be in a state of mind because it is a current events magazine. You know, it's like reading a People magazine from 1978. Like, it's interesting, but it's not really. It's written to be. Here's some breaking news, and for the most part, most of the stuff that's covered in a magazine or a comic book like Marvel Age, it's all old news. So it's not very. The books aren't super expensive in the back issue market, but the thing is with Marvel Age, sometimes they would have occasionally first appearances because they'd be previewing characters that were coming up. So technically, Marvel Age had kind of the first appearances of certain teams because they were saying, "Hey, this team is going to be published soon." Doesn't really count though. Weird. It doesn't really count as like their first appearance because it's a informational magazine. Marvel Age is an oddity, but Marvel Age #1, very cool to see that on the stands this month. And that's it for Marvel Comics.
You were saying?
Now at the movie theater in 1983 of April, there were a few kind of, let me see here, like two mainstream big films, important films in the history of film. First one, April 11th, Flashdance. Flashdance hit the movie screen. Everyone knows Flashdance. It's about the steelworking girl with a heart of gold who strips on the weekends, and all she wants to do is study proper dance at the conservatory, and she has to convince the stodgy whatever the people's names are that let you into conservatory dance schools that she can really move well enough. So it's a class struggle, but a legendary movie, Flashdance. We've also got Valley Girl on April 29th, the Nicolas Cage Valley Girl movie. Now, this is a cult classic. It brought that, like, oh, gag me with a spoon, Valley Girl kind of sensibility to the country. It was a big, big, big hit. Then it disappeared, and it's gone on to become, like, cult status. Young Nick Cage is fantastic in it. A couple other notables this month. Lone Wolf McQuade with Chuck Norris, David Carradine. I love this movie. This movie was on HBO a million times. I've watched it 150 million times. Fantastic. Another movie that was on HBO repeatedly and for the end of time was Heart Like a Wheel, about Shirley Cha-Cha Muldowney, starring a young Bonnie Bedelia, a pre-diehard Bonnie Bedelia. And it was about the racing life of, she was a drag racer, Shirley Muldowney. She was like the first female drag racer. I don't think it holds up as a film, but I must have watched this movie a million times as a kid. It was always on HBO. So Heart Like a Wheel, Lone Wolf McQuade, Flashdance, Valley Girl, fantastic. And that's it for
You were saying?
Let's dig into our comic book this month, which is G.I. Joe issue number 10.
Now, mass is ready.
written by Larry Hama. If you're listening to this podcast and you don't know who Larry Hama is, I'm curious as to why you're listening to this podcast. Larry Hama he's a comic book writer. He's an artist. He's an actor. He's a musician. He's done all kinds of stuff. He considers himself an artist because he is one. He's working in comics since the 70s. He's the godfather of G.I. Joe. And again, I apologize for 99% of the audience. I'm sure you guys know all this stuff, but he is the godfather of G.I. Joe. We need to give him proper props for that. Larry was working at Marvel Comics. He was editing. He was writing. Let's see. He was working on Crazy. Actually, he was working on Crazy magazine. He worked on Iron Fist over at Marvel, and he did a little bit of Kazar over at DC. He edited Wonder Woman, Mr. Miracle, Super Friends, The Warlord. He even edited Welcome Back, Kotter. I got issue 1 of that. It's fantastic. It's absolutely hilarious. And then he went over to Marvel in 1980 as an editor. And while he was there, and this is the apocryphal origins of G.I. Joe, he was working on a project called a Nick Fury spinoff called Fury Force. It was about a special mission force. And Larry had served in the Army. Larry served over in Vietnam from 1969 to 1971. He was a firearms and explosives ordnance expert. I believe, if memory serves, he was on an LRRP, with Long Range Recon Patrol, which is important because he put Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow and Stalker and Wade Collins on an LRRP. That became Snake Eyes' origin. And you can see in most of Larry's comic book work how being in Vietnam and the experience of being in that war and being in the trenches with those guys and those people influenced and shaped his writing. Not only just because G.I. Joe is military, but he took the characters that he was friends with, and he took the experiences and he brought them to G.I. Joe, which gave G.I. Joe just a level of realism, a level of depth that most toy lines would never have considered even trying to get. Transformers never had the kind of depth that G.I. Joe did. It's absolutely true, because G.I. Joe were real people, and they're real people that Larry served with. You'll hear him talk about that a little bit in the interview that's at the end of this podcast. So he had this idea for Fury Force, and during the same time, Hasbro reached out to Marvel and said, hey, we've got this toy line, these G.I. Joe guys, we'd like to do a comic book with them. And Marvel said, hey, we've got this idea, this Fury Force idea. It sounds similar to this G.I. Joe team, Special Mission Force. Let's merge the two and come up with G.I. Joe. And what you get is this realistic take on these fantastical cartoon characters. Larry brought this real world sense of military terms, strategies, a bunch of martial arts references, everything. He brought that to the G.I. Joe, the pages of G.I. Joe. And those that would have never come from Hasbro. They were churning out toys, The Hasbro then came to him and said, hey, why don't you write the majority of the file cards? So Larry ended up naming and writing the histories for like the vast majority of the file cards from like day one through, I don't even know. I've actually never been able to find like the end date of when he stops. I'm sure at some point they started doing them in-house, but all the seminal ones, all like the early years, the ones that the characters that really burn into people's hearts, that's all Larry Hama. A lot of the names were friends of his, or the character personalities were based on people he knew. Scarlet, he's always said her personality was based on his wife, and that's how he wrote them in the comic book. That's why these characters are very much real people. So Larry's not just a writer, though; he's also a very talented artist, and most importantly, he wrote issue number 21. And by wrote, I mean he drew, because there's no dialogue. Issue 21 of G.I. Joe, which is the silent interlude issue. And that's Larry's art. That's probably his finest work that I've enjoyed. He's revisited the silent issue a few times over the years, and it always adds something fun to it. Recently, he put Dawn, the new Snake Eyes Dawn, he put her through her own silent issue where she kind of was reliving Snake Eyes' memories of it. And he wrote G.I. Joe from issue 1, like we talked about last issue. He skipped, he possibly skipped 8. We're not sure. His name's not on it, but neither is a credited writer. And then he definitely skipped issue 9 where Stephen Grant came on. And then from issue 10 on, Larry wrote G.I. Joe all the way to 155. And then when Devil's Due came back, they asked him to come on, and he wrote some declassified stuff, which was like digging into the origins of the characters. Until finally, fast forward, IDW, when they revived the current continuity with issue 155 and 1/2, Larry came back and has been since writing G.I. Joe all the way through, as of this recording, issue 250. Plus, I'm not even talking about all the specials he wrote. He wrote backup stories for some of the toys that came out in the 2000 releases. He wrote like new stories for those. He wrote stories that were in the G.I. Joe magazine. So I mean, Larry's written like 99.9% of everything G.I. Joe, and even the stuff that he maybe didn't write was just based on everything that he wrote. There's very few corners of G.I. Joe that you can point to that doesn't have Larry's thumbprint on it, and that's because it's a testament to how well he wrote them and how strongly he wrote them. It's definitely a shadow to anyone who's going to come in and write a G.I. Joe series. He didn't only write G.I. Joe though. He also did a series called Nth Man, the Ultimate Ninja. It was about an American Special Forces commando. It had a great Mike Zeck cover, if memory serves. And I was always curious about this book because I never, as a kid, I was like, how do you pronounce Nth Man? Like Ninth Man? It's not the ninth man, he's the Nth Man. And then it was like an alternate reality World War III. And since it was Larry, I was like, is he a part of the G.I. Joe team? Because it's ninjas and military. But then it wasn't. It's really well written magazine. But as a kid, I was like, where does this fit in? Because everything had to fit in my head. But it's a cool comic book. I don't know if it's ever been collected. It only ran 16 issues. Shouldn't be terribly difficult to get on the back issue market. But it might be harder to find, but not necessarily expensive. He also did a great run on in the mainstream Marvel universe. He did a great run on Wolverine. His Wolverine run was, for me, he worked with Mark Silvestri, and the highlight, and you guys might laugh at me, I loved the Robot Wolverine and LCD, the little girl that was an assassin killer that ran around with the Robot Wolverine. I love those characters. I don't know why. I thought they were awesome. And it was the issues with Sylvester doing the art. So the art was gorgeous. And Larry Hama's Wolverine stuff is really, 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 really strong. So you should check that out. And here's a fun little bit of deep comic book trivia for you guys. Larry was a part of the Krusty Bunkers. The Krusty Bunkers was a pseudonym of a whole bunch of inkers that hung around Neil Adams and Dick Giordano's studios, continuity studios in the mid-70s. So when if a job came up and there was a rush job or something, they would pass it off to, let's say something when Neil was working on, and they didn't have time to get it inked right away. They would pass the pages out to all these guys that were a part of the quote Krusty Bunkers. And it is a murderer's row of talent in this group. So they would get credited to the Krusty Bunkers because they wouldn't exactly know, one guy may have done one page, another guy may have done half of a page, et cetera, and so on. So you'll see in a bunch of older 70s comics and early 80s comics, it'll say, Krusty Bunkers. And we're talking Neil Adams, Dick Giordano, Jack Abel, Terry Austin, Pat Broderick, Frank Brunner, Rich Buckler, Chaykin, Cockrum, Dennis Cohen, Steve Englehart, Larry Hama, Russ Heath, Klaus Janson, who's so talented, Alan Kupperberg, Esteban Maroto, Bob McLeod, Al Milgram, Gray Morrow, Mike Netzer, Carl Potts, Marshall Rogers, Mary Screens, James Sherman, Jim Starlin, Trevor Von Eden. Trevor Von Eden stuff is so gorgeous. If you've never seen Trevor Von Eden Batman, Google it. You will knock your eyes out. Bob Wiasek, Bernie Wrightson. I mean, all these dudes were just hanging out at Continuity Studios, and they were all part of the Krusty Bunkers. So Larry Hama, a Krusty Bunker. So cool. So that's a little background on Larry. And again, it was my sincere pleasure. It's funny. I've been going to comic conventions since I was, 12 years old or something like that, 30 years. I don't think I've ever met Larry until recently. and not for want of. I think he was never at cons that I happened to be at, and so it was like my 12-year-old joy to get to meet him, and it was such a blessing that he gave me 10 minutes of his time, and so I hope you guys enjoy the interview that comes at the end of the show. And I'm sure there's a whole bunch about Larry that I'm missing and overlooking, so please don't take this as a comprehensive biography of Larry. Take this as an opportunity for you to seek out and learn more yourself, because he's a fascinating dude. He plays guitar in a band. They played at CBD. He talks about this in the interview. It's fantastic. He was an actor. He was on an episode of MASH. He was on an episode of Saturday Night Live. He's just a wonderful dude, and I know some people who know him personally through the comic world, and they say on a personal level, just the most charming, just a friendly, generous guy. So salute to Larry Hama. I hope this makes you guys seek out more, and next time you see him at a con, just thank him so much for G.I. Joe and for everything he's given us. And so now here we go, issue 10 of G.I. Joe.
I have mastered the device.
We start with a cover by Mike Vosberg and Chick Stone. This is a fantastic cover. It tells so much. There's a funny part of this cover. It's got Scarlet and Snake Eyes, and they're sneaking through a suburban town. It says, the sign says, "Welcome to Springfield," a nice little town. That's charming. And if you look closely, and they're on a mission, they're for real on a mission. Scarlet could not be smiling anymore. She could not be happier to be walking down the streets of a suburb with her weapon drawn on the hunt, presumably for Cobra, with just the biggest, broadest smile on her face. And what I like about that is it is the picture of suburban idyllic life. She has the face of a happy, I'm happy to live in the suburbs, happy housewife kind of thing, even though the rest of the scene belies that entirely. But her face alone says, hey, we're in the suburbs, we need to be happy. And I gotta believe that's intentional. I love it, absolutely love it. The great, obviously the gag on the cover is that the houses, quote, houses that they're walking past are just facades, because you see that their one house front is actually literally propped up by wood boards, and behind it are some Cobra Troopers. Now, if you look closely at these Cobra Troopers, this is a continuation of the, I won't call it I don't want to say it's a problem, because it's not problematic per se, but it's just the off-model issues that we were having last issue, where with Mike Vosberg did the art, who's super talented and fantastic and great. So this is not a knock on this is not a knock at all on the artistic skills, but there's definitely a difference in modeling. So if you look at these Cobra soldiers, they actually look a little more like two Cobra commanders standing there. The uniforms are just a little off, and it makes me wonder if they were told, if they were given hey, free reign, kind of do what you want to do, or if they didn't have the full character designs from Hasbro, because the characters were on model for the first issues. And then here we're getting closer to what they are, but there's still a little offness about them. Not so much with Scarlet and Snake Eyes. Snake Eyes is back to normal. Last issue, remember Mike Vosberg gave him this Cyclops visor. That's gone now. So it makes me think that there was some correction. They came in and said, no. Snake Eyes has to look this way. They took the Cobra insignia that was on previously on the side of the helmet, and they put it on the front of the helmet again. So it feels like there's definitely some course correction. And we also should say that we had those 2 issues, or maybe issue and a half or whatever, that Larry took off. That's why I feel like this is really the start of the mythos. It's almost as if there was hey, take a month off, figure out what this book's going to be, and come on back strong, because he certainly does come back firing.
Yo, Joe!
With a story called A Nice Little Town Like Ours, written by Larry Hama, penciled by Mike Vosberg, Chick Stone inking, Joe Rosen lettering, Christy Scheel is the colorist, Denny O'Neil editor, and Jim Shooter is the editor-in-chief. This opening kind of half splash page, I love it because of the kind of design style trick that they do, where the building in the middle, and that is completely fleshed out and inked and colored and fully formed, and all the buildings in the background, in order to make that building pop, they're just this washed out blue-greenish tone. It might have even been some kind of acetate layover, in the actual art. He may not have drawn it on there. They may have just drawn it, done maybe color stats. And actually, that's what it looks like, because it doesn't look like there's any actual pencil lines. So they may have just done a color layover with that. So when it prints, and if you see it, you'll see what I'm talking about. The building that we're focusing on, that we're concerned about, 100% looks comic booky. The rest looks like if you were to go into Photoshop and just do a like a transparency on it. That's really what it looks like, a transparency. That's the word I'm searching for here. And it's great. It really pops. And especially in this age, which is a pre-Photoshop age. So tricks like this, they really had to be masters of the art and of the printing process, really. Not even so much the art, like how to draw it, but the actual printing process and understanding what would look good on a printer page. So this is really good. It's really solid. And we've got Scarlet and Snake Eyes and Zap breaking into the this building on top. Now they know that Cobra's inside the building. They see a bunch of security cameras fakes. Like they know Cobra's inside. They know they're being watched, etc. So on. It's kind of like an ambush thing. There is a note in here. This is from the IDW complete collection that we're reading it from, and the editors there make a note that Short Fuse is initially drawn without his glasses, and Grunt wears body armor, which speaks to that off-modelness again. Grunt shows up on a later page, and he's wearing like Flash's body armor. So there's some little bit of tightening up here that needs to be done. However, having said that, it still looks gorgeous.
Yo, Joe!
Might be one of my favorite styles of panels to illustrate like building height whenever they're dealing with someone like on street level, where they do a panel that takes the whole page and you put the camera close to the ground, not necessarily on the ground, but close to the ground, so you can focus at the bottom of the panel. You can focus on the guys that you're dealing with in the story, but then the vanishing point goes all the way up to the top, and you get like this scope that, this high rise and everything like that. And so we're introduced to the rest of the assault team. It's Hawk, Clutch, Short Fuse, Flash, Rock and Roll, and it's what we're seeing in the caption is kind of the breakdown of, or on the previous page they called it the mission verification. The mission was verification and neutralization of a Cobra stronghold, and it gives you the personnel breakdown. So again, doing a great job of naming the toys and identifying for the kids to read and understand. Middle panel is where we see Grunt being misidentified, or at least misuniformed. Now here, hey, hold on. We're gonna go for a Marvel No Prize here. He's not wearing the wrong? Well, he technically is wearing the wrong uniform. It's because his regular uniform was in the laundry, and he had to borrow Flash's get up. So that's why he's wearing it. It's not drawn incorrectly. His other stuff was torn or ripped. I do love the Les Mis reference. This is fantastic. Them traveling through the sewers of New York. Parisian sewers may be romantic, but New York sewers plain stink. That's awesome. And you see this Cobra soldier down here on the bottom. He's got they give him like a golden circle on his chest, and maybe it was supposed to be red or something. But again, a little non-model-y, and the Baroness is just wearing a plain black sweater with no real at that point she already had like shoulder pads or design work on her top. She never was really just like in a plain black top, so it's a little bit off model, but we just jump right into the action. That's what's great about this, is there's no fooling around in this issue. We're in the middle of the issue. Previous ones, if you remember, we'd get Cobra, something bad would happen, then we'd get a mission briefing, and then we'd send them out. This issue just foregoes all that, and just, they're in the middle of a mission. You caught them.
Yo, Joe!
And possibly the most elaborate trap ever designed in a building. It's the kind of trap that you see in the cartoon. Specifically, I'm thinking of when the Crimson Twins would jump out of their window or off their rooftop, and all these poles would slide out of the extensive Enterprise building, and they would do all these acrobatics on the pole. And it's like they plan to one day jump along the side of their own building, and like they planned for that in the schematics and made the poles. Oh yeah, they did. And in this case, Cobra planned to have one day foil people breaking in the top of their roof, because it collapses like a trap door, and it's quite a ways down too, which tells me that the first, we'll say 3 to 4 floors of that building aren't occupied. They're just a black hole, because that's what the roof just completely closes in. It's crazy. Snake Eyes saves them with a rope that Scarlet hooks a rope around an arrow that Scarlet shoots, which is pretty sweet. And what I dig about this is that it shows that they're capable. They did save themselves, and then through no real fault of their own, a Cobra Trooper comes over and just whacks it with an axe and cuts him down, which, by the way, I like that he just has an axe handy. And he cuts the rope, and so then they fall, and they do fall into the trap. So they're not completely caught off guard. They're very capable people. They do sort of save themselves, but there's nothing you can do about another guy coming by and cutting your support rope, you know?
Yo, Joe!
Hawk in this panel is fantastic. I love that drawing of Hawk. He is fierce. He's angry. He realizes that when Scarlet misses a radio check, they got to hit it. Clutch just drives this undercover van, right through the front door. Everyone piles out, guns blazing, rock and rolls there. There's more people are in that red with the red flash checkered stuff. So it's definitely a stylistic choice. Everyone's storming the building because they've just lost contract with Scarlet.
Yo, Joe!
So this page, the issue gets a little bit of Fantastic Four-y, where Scarlet and Snake Eyes and Zap, they're trapped in a room that's got like curved walls, and they don't understand, like, why isn't this like a square walled dungeon? You know, they were trapped by Cobra. We cut over to Baroness, and she punches a button, and they feel like an earthquake. And we see, this is the Fantastic Four part of it, the whole top of the building was an aircraft, and it takes off and it flies away, kind of like and it is shaped very much like the kind of like boat craft that the Fantastic Four would fly in, like they're in the Fantastic Car, where it was like shaped like a tub. And that's what's going on here. This quote aircraft is not shaped like any aircraft. It is just a square box with rounded edges and some thrusters on the bottom and thrusters in the back, and it hovers and it takes off. Not a plane. There's no wings. There's no anything on it. It just picks up and flies away, very much like something that would happen over the Fantastic Four. It's really crazy, and I dig it. I really like it a lot. The Joes, they get to the roof and they see it take off, and they realize those three are on their own because we can't help them.
Yo, Joe!
I like that they took the time to show the Baroness knocking them out with gas. And what does this do? This makes it very easy for them to lose track of where they are. You know, if they're not, quote, knocked out, then we have to worry about, for the whole, however long this duration of this trip is, which we never find out, and they certainly don't either. Would that whole, like, say, couple hours in the flight, would they be trying to escape during that time, or would they be counting it so they'd know that they only traveled 30 minutes, so they could only be within 30 miles, 30 minutes flight of New York, etc., and so on. The knockout gas is the much later panel in the third panel for us. So where the caption says much later, that's putting the knockout gas on us, so we can't tell either. We don't know. We have no way of figuring out where the Springfield is. I really like that. It's a really strong storytelling choice. And we're with the Joes when they wake up and they're in a prison, and we're introduced to a young boy. Now, this boy is not named in this episode, but if you're a longtime Joe comic fan, you know who this guy is. You know what he's destined to be. And I wonder how much of that was laid out in this moment, but I absolutely love that we're introduced very early on in the series, before we even meet Destro, to Billy Kessler. Billy, of course, would go on to be revealed to be Cobra Commander's son. But right now, all he is a kid who's important. It's top secret security, but he's being held captive in the jail by Cobra. More on Billy later, because Scarlet is having nightmares, absolute nightmares. She's seeing everything. Like Zap is melting like a candle. Her hands are turning into claws. She's seeing gargoyles.
Yo, Joe!
And on the next page, we're introduced for the first time to Dr. Venom, and we learn that he's drugs the prisoners with hallucinogens through the water supply. And this middle panel is such an important panel. It'll be revisited. This look would be revisited many times over the years. This is the famous brainwave scanner. This is the machine that gave us back Snake Eyes. This is the moment when Snake Eyes' brain gets stolen by Dr. Venom. And there he is standing next to Cobra Commander and Baroness. It's a mind-reading machine, and it allows them to visualize and see what's inside Snake Eyes' mind. Now, what they're using is they're using it to try to figure out G.I. Joe's secrets. But what it's going to show us is Snake Eyes' origins, which is fantastic. Dr. Venom is a balding, middle-aged scientist type. The rationale behind how his machine works, I absolutely love. The computer will continue to flash thousands of images, basic images like an apple, and record the corresponding brainwave signature until it has amassed a personalized vocabulary of the subject's thinking patterns. So then they flip it around, and when they reverse the process, the computer can read the subject's thoughts and enhance them and project them on a TV monitor for these guys to see. So first, it trains itself to say, when you see an apple, your brain responds this way. When you see a frog, your brain responds that way. And it makes a language for what your individual brain works. Then they reverse it, and then they can see it. And I love that they gave this much thought to it, for real. They could have easily just said, we can read people's minds with it. And you've seen that done on a million shows. No, they actually put thought into it. How would this work? So Snake Eyes is like trussed up, and his mask is off of him. And there you see an apple on a screen, and that's what's being relayed to these monitors. It's like Clockwork Orange, but with mind reading. I love it. It's absolutely great.
Yo, Joe!
And we check in on Scarlet, who is still having these hallucinations, which are fantastic. She's seeing a lot of cobras, which makes sense. Zap is like a flipped-over turtle in the sun. They get their bread and water sent to them, and Billy helps them, tells them that it's the water that's causing the hallucinations. And you have to hold it up to a light in order to kind of burn the drugs out of it. That must be one hell of a hot light, frankly. But in this final panel, you see that Zap is laying on his back like he's a flipped-over turtle. Very funny. I really dig in these top three panels that with the color scheme just changed entirely. It becomes a dreamscape. It's all this muted purple dreamscape to kind of tell you that it's in there. And you see one of... So I feel like it's got to be Billy's dream, because the first one we see Scarlet and she's seeing snakes. The next one we see Zap and he's seeing a turtle. But Billy knows that it's that the drug's in the water, so I don't know why he'd be drinking it. But Billy's flash shows him that he's afraid of clowns and snakes, which is pretty great because his dad is a clown and the head snake.
Yo, Joe!
Such an important page. So Dr. Venom, he's trying to get Snake Eyes to think of the G.I. Joe headquarters. In the meantime, Snake Eyes is thinking of all these other things yet. And this is where we learn the origin of Snake Eyes. We get our first glimpses at it. You know, we see that he was just a kid from a small town, worked at a gas station. He went to prom. He served military. I'm assuming this later on, it'll be told that it was a G.I. Joe training mission. Where this happened, but this is like that first glimpse of it where Snake Eyes got hurt on a helicopter mission. That's how his face got blasted, and then when they fleshed it out, they tightened it up a little bit because you don't see any of the other Joes in here. And they're talking about they're actually on a mission in the Middle Eastern desert. Their fuel line is leaking and gas is spraying, and the helicopter crashes, and that's how Snake Eyes got his face blown up. Later on, we'll deal with the more detailed origin where it was Snake Eyes actually rescuing Scarlet and all that stuff. But for now, this is a fascinating glimpse into the most mysterious of G.I. Joes.
Yo, Joe!
So this is one of our hints that Billy is a real exceptional kid. Now, again, they don't name him Billy, but we're going to call him that because that's who he is. When he's explaining about how the water works and the drugs and how they figure out the trick with the light bulb, he remembers reading about certain drugs, react and stuff. Up top, the third panel on this page, it is one of Wally Wood's 22 panels. There's a few of these that we're going to come across as we go on, but it's it's either his big head or his extreme close-up panel. I want to say it's his big head panel on the top right because he's got some exposition to give, and he cocks the angle a little downwards, like pointing upward on the face, and you get just great shot of Billy's face, and it's gripping. It puts you in the role of you're sitting there in the cell and you're focused on Billy. If you do this scene from a little further back, it's more boring. This is much more interesting. Move the camera down a little bit, shoot it up, get some shadows on his face. It's great. It's a great panel. And one of Wally Wood's 22 panels, which, again, we're going to talk about in a later episode. We talked a little bit about last time. And more importantly, it shows that Billy's very capable, and he's a special kid. He's not just a run-of-the-mill suburban dope like the rest of us were. Meanwhile, Venom is still trying to extract information. He sees Snake Eyes' last mission out of Saigon, and this panel is very important, would come to be very, 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 very important. We see that his family was killed in a flaming car wreck. And that's the memory that Snake Eyes is trying to fixate on in order to not show where the G.I. Joe base is. And it's almost as if he's working through from more basic memories of, hey, I grew up, I worked here, I went to prom, blah, 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 to more painful ones, which was, oh, this is when my face got mashed up, to extremely painful ones, which is, probably the most painful memory is his family killed in a car wreck. And he's really digging in and trying his best, his hardest, to not give in to the brainwave scanner.
Yo, Joe!
And I just realized who Dr. Venom is reminding me of, very much so, and I would not be surprised if he was the inspiration for it. Peter Cushing, Grand Moff Tarkin from Star Wars and a million Hammer horror films. Yeah, that's what Venom is. That's what Dr. Venom is. He's totally Peter Cushing, and this is great. Venom sees that he's finally getting where he needs, and it's just a motor pool. So Snake Eyes has given him what he wants, but he hasn't given him the where of it. But this is what the motor pool looks like. And this slow turn that they give him in these 3 panels of like he's watching the screen and he just turns his head towards Snake Eyes like you're motivated, but you can't keep this up forever. I'm getting there. I'm going to get this out of you. Really strong. Like it's this like slowly he turned kind of moment. And meanwhile, back in the cell, Billy is freaking out and screaming about like an anti-Cobra meeting and underground stuff. So the guards that were watching them, which again in this panel they're strangely off model. They all have Snake Eyes' outfit on. It's that old like break out of jail ruse that we've seen on a million times in TV shows where someone is like, oh my God, I'm sick, I'm hurt, whatever, and then they open the jail door and then the guy's really not hurt and he punches them. Or they're hiding behind the door and they swing down and they crack him one. And they do that here. So they go in to get Billy while the other 2 are pretending to be drugged up, and Scarlet and Zap break out and bust heads on the guards.
Yo, Joe!
It's funny. Just like on the previous page, the top 3 panels are used in the exact same manner, which I like. It gives now in this printing, they're on opposite pages of another. But if they were, I don't know in the original, I'm not looking at the original right now, if they were like side to side against each other, but it would make a nice, like, what do you call that? Like parallel synchronicity on the page, because these top 3 of the guard looking at this console and he sees the Joes walking by and they're all in disguise as the other guards now with Billy. And he kind of just boredly goes back to what he's doing. That kind of mirrors the transition that Venom had on the previous page of looking at the 3 panels. So it's a neat little synchronicity, I guess would be the right word. And this is great that we see that it's Scarlet in disguise and Billy and Zap, and they're breaking out. And what's great is that the guy tells them to don't forget to stop and put on their civvies, which tells you that they're on the streets of Springfield. They're in a small town. And while this is all happening, Venom is getting closer. He's seeing He's seeing a lot more images of the G.I. Joe team. He's seeing them in the training facilities. Snake Eyes is trying his hardest to block them with these painful memories. And looks like it's the burial of his family. Later on, we would know that it was his mom, his dad, and his little sister. And there's 4 caskets here. I'm not sure who the 4th casket would be. Might just, they may not have actually nailed that down yet, but. There's a 4 casket funeral happening, or the thing on the far left of that image might not be a casket. It might be like the delivery device that drops people into the grave, however you want to say it. If it was a no prize, that's what I would say. And this last panel is 100% Peter Cushing.
Yo, Joe!
So this page is where it's at for Springfield. This really lays it out of basically the whole history of Cobra. That the soap people came to town, a pyramid scheme came to town to sell cleaning products, and the weekly sales meeting escalated into leadership indoctrination, and the ball was rolling, and soon everyone was involved. And Scarlet and Zap and Billy are driving through this town in a stolen little hatchback, and you're seeing ice cream parlors, you're seeing people mow the lawn, kids playing hopscotch, pizza joints, gas stations, and everything. Everything is totally normal suburban. A U.S. mail post office. That tells you they're in the U.S., and 2, that they're on the grid. They are getting United States mail service here. They're totally on the grid. But in the bottom of it, at the very final pages, it goes from being like, oh, it's idyllic suburban to underneath all that, there's Cobra radar dishes. The garages have Cobra tanks in them. The pizza parlor has a storeroom for gas. If you look at the kind of the coloring of the page, it gets darker as you get to the bottom. So up top is bright colors, You know, they're playing outside. Everything's, you know, relatively normal colors. But then when they show that there's a radar dish in the sign, it's got a red background, like a dark red background. Then the Cobra tanks are inside a darkened garage with dark purple and dark orange walls. And then the pizza parlor, it's almost entirely in black. You know, that's one of the Wallywood panels, the like all black panel. You know, where everything's black except the few things they want you to see, which is the Cobra gas canisters and then some sales for pizza and free Coca-Cola. So it takes on that more ominous tone as you get to the bottom of the page, which is pretty neat.
Yo, Joe!
Now, Dr. Venom has set up shop underneath a video game parlor, which, you know, hey, listen, man, video game parlors, they were where it's at in the 80s. They kind of don't exist today. I mean, I guess they do, Dave & Buster's, but back in the 80s, they were just standalone video parlors where it was all you did was it was a room full of machines to pump quarters and play video games. Now they have barcades. You know, that's kind of the new retro revival thing. But back then, having his headquarters underneath a video arcade is an awesome idea, because that's where the kids are going to be at, you know, and that's where it's a lot of ruckus, a lot of cover for any ne'er-do-wells coming and going. And I like that Billy says a couple of grown-ups walking in that place, you know, they're going to stick out like sore thumbs, which they would. And sure enough, let's look at this. So we've got a sweet like half-page splash going on. The games are like they're not real names, but it's like Red Baron, Grand Prix, Starfighter, Spaceman. There's one called Vader, Space Invaders probably, and just a ton of kids. It's like something out of the movie Tron. And in the middle of it is this highlighted is this kid in a kind of a real looking laser thing playing some game that he's shooting into the sky. The wonderful coloring trick to get you to focus on that is all of the other games are colored similar colors. So all the games bordering the wall are blue and looks like kind of a beigeish gray purplish color, but they're all the same color. No, they're different games. They just color them all the same. The people in the background players, all the extras, the kids playing the games, they're also just this beigeish purple, and the games in the middle are just same color orange, and then you've got this red laser in the middle, which is important because it becomes an important part of the story. So this is like a textbook coloring technique and like lesson to that you don't have to color everything exactly what the color is. You color it to make the effect for the eye, for the reader that you want them to see.
Yo, Joe!
And as much as Billy thought having him with him as cover would work, it did not work. They get about 5 feet into this place, and all these little Cobra Ratso kids are like, he's a traitor. I've never seen those adults before. Like, get him out. And that laser gun swivels and is going to shoot at him like it's a real laser gun, which begs the question, why would you... I don't know. I love that it is. Don't get me wrong. I love that it is. It's a great gag. It's a great gimmick. And I guess if someone was going to raid the place, maybe the walls blow up. But why would you hide a laser that could actually defend the place inside the place? Wouldn't it be better to like have that outside and like, stop anyone from invading? But in this case, like it's great. It's a great gag though. I love it. Absolutely not complaining. Just it's really funny that they would go to the trouble of masquerading that game as an actual laser and then put it in a room that's like 20 by 20, you know? And we check in on Snake Eyes, and he is struggling. I like that they keep his face completely in shadow. We see that he's finally thinking about General Hawk. Well, he's not General yet, but Hawk. And so he's getting there. His vital signs are fluctuating. His heartbeat is becoming erratic. Oh, no, the strain is taking its toll.
Yo, Joe!
Snake Eyes is about to die. But in the meantime, that's when the Joes start getting attacked upstairs by this little runt in the laser, right? So they're getting an intruder alert. So that means Venom and the Cobra Soldier has to run upstairs, and they miss what Snake Eyes starts to think of at the time. And we get our first glimpse to what would later, we would learn to be the Arashikage dojo, where Snake Eyes learned to be a ninja with Tommy. And it's where a sensei of his, who's wearing a hooded mask, which is kind of creepy, he taught Snake Eyes how to still his breath and heartbeat so that he would pretend to be dead. This is an amazing skill and would come into play multiple times over the course of this series. Like Snake Eyes would fake his death a bunch. I think Storm Shadow did it a couple times too. It's great. And this is the origin of it. And I love that they ran out of the room so they don't know that that's what he's thinking about and that's what he's going to fake for him.
Yo, Joe!
And we get this little runt shooting lasers at the Joe team. It's such an enclosed space. It just seems like, wow, how are we not going to kill everyone else in the room trying to blast these guys? And what's even better is Dr. Venom sees this. He goes up there, takes a look. And it's one of those Wallywood all black panels, which is dynamite. And he sees what's going on, and he just goes, nah, the junior officers have it under control. They're literally shooting lasers at two G.I. Joe, escaped G.I. Joe members, and Venom is so concerned about his experiments and not necessarily the welfare of Cobra that he just ignores it and says, let them take care of it. Like even the soldier says, like, they're kids, we should help them. He's like, what? And they come down, and Snake Eyes is dead. No heartbeat. And so they unhook him from the machine.
Yo, Joe!
Crack a thacka wacka. Snake Eyes, not dead. Spoiler alert. Punches that dude in the face. Breaks out. His face still shrouded in shadow because they don't want us to see it. We see him put it on. And what I dig about this panel is, with the exception of the Venom going like, what? And the guard going, huh? It's just all silent. It's just because Snake Eyes, one, he's not going to talk, but two, it's just, we don't need explanation. We don't need like caption saying, you know, he puts his mask on and grabs his gun and runs up the stairs. It's just like Snake Eyes takes over. That's what's wonderful about this page. The silent ninja just takes over. Everything goes silent, and it's just, let's move, everybody. And you see him running back up the same stairs that they just came down.
Yo, Joe!
Busts down the door and punches a hole through the power supply for the laser. And then he proceeds to hold his weapon trained on these kids. Like, I don't know what he knows. I don't know, if he knows, maybe he was awake when they drug him through there. Maybe he understands that they're all Cobra soldiers. But as far as we see, what he knows is he walked in a room with a bunch of kids shooting at his friends, and he's just going to point his weapon at these kids until they make their getaway. That's pretty funny.
Yo, Joe!
Nice overhead shot here as we see them drive through the airfield. We get the glimpse that there's, airplane, tower, things like that. We find that flying penthouse, they call it. Some soldiers are working on it. I still don't understand how that flies, but launch maybe, but fly seems really hard. They rope up a bunch of Cobra creeps. And this is a great moment. They try to get this kid. They don't name him, but it's Billy. They try to get him to go with them, but he says his family is here working underground and working against Cobra. He got caught, so he's got to get back to him. And he can't just run away, And this is a line that is so strong and so important. I think even like today, not to oversell it, but, this is my home. I just can't run away. He's got to stay and fight. And I think that a lot of that's resonant with stuff going on today, like where no, the reason people are upset and sticking around and fighting against some of the things that are happening in this country is because it's our home. We don't want to see it go down the tubes. We don't want to see it taken over by hate and, things like that. And that's what Billy is saying here without saying it. So it's awesome. And he waves them goodbye. And the next time we see him, I believe the next time we see him is he's attempting to assassinate Cobra Commander. So they get moving towards New York City and they take off in their like Fantastic Four tub-esque boat plane.
Yo, Joe!
A little bit of exposition here that they have no idea where they're flying because they really don't know where they're at. There's a storm, so they can't really tell by landmarks what's going on. The pilot's uncooperative. And the pilot is hiding a gun inside his helmet, of all places. That's a hell of a place to hide a gun. But he has a pistol in his helmet, and he gets a shot off at Snake Eyes. And I'll tell you, man, Snakes ain't fooling. Snake punches 4 holes right in this dude. There's no parachute for this guy. He's dead. Like, it's great. And he also fried the navigational controls. So Zap can take over and keep them level, but they don't have any idea where they're going. And this is all wonderful, a wonderful, wonderful way, going all the way back to the beginning when they were gassed. They didn't know where they were going. Now they literally have no idea where they're going because of the storm, their navigation. All they can do is kind of go straight.
Yo, Joe!
And they do that until they see there's a large city below them with a seaport and everything. And they don't know where they're at. but they know enough that they can ditch the plane in the water and they can jump out with some parachutes. And in a thing that could only happen in a Marvel comic, Scarlet parachutes and she lands right on top of the Incredible Hulk. And in the fourth panel, the guy in the Hulk costume, because it's not the real Hulk, he says, "Did Marsha Rosenberg book you for this opening too without telling me?" And Marsha Rosenberg, she worked in the bullpen. She worked at Marvel Comics, and I believe she was in charge of booking live appearances. It's funny. I'm trying to Google it, but they unfortunately, not unfortunately, but they named a character called Volcana Marsha Rosenberg, probably in tribute to the real Marsha Rosenberg. And I know I've read about her, but now whenever I Google her and try to do searches, all I get is the Volcana information, even with words like bullpen and real life. So Marsha Rosenberg is a real person, which I love that they used her. And we learned that they landed in Bayonne, New Jersey. So they were able to take a quick little bus over to New York. Of course, the bus driver is Ralph Cramden. He says no weirdos on his bus. Snake Eyes is sporting a rifle, which they're apparently cool with. And the Marvel booking agent, they loaned him bus fare to get back to Staten Island. Now, this is weird. There's all of us. Well, I think it's the word balloon is just pointing to the wrong person is what it is. There's a fourth dude all of a sudden with him, and the word balloon is coming from the dude, not Scarlet. And then Zap says something, and then Ralph Cramden says something. But I think it's just a word balloon misplacement on the very last panel. It's supposed to be coming out of Scarlet. But it looks like they just picked up a fourth friend, which is very odd. So, yeah, this is great. So it's a great ending. And it ends with the Joes still not knowing where Springfield is, but you now know that Springfield has their hooks somewhere in an American town. Like they've really entrenched themselves, more so than we've seen previously. We see that Dr. Venom has this scanner that can read minds. So now we glimpse a little bit about Snake Eyes without having him write something out or tell his story through someone else. And we're introduced to Billy. Like there's so much that happens in this issue. It's absolutely fantastic. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. Stay tuned after the wrap up here. We're going to include the Larry Hama interview. And now you Joe, and Joeing is half the battle. Hello, Joe and Joe listeners. Do I have a treat for you right now? This is my exclusive interview with Larry Hama from the floor of the Wondercon. I've done my best to make the audio as legible as and audible as possible, but it's still we've got a lot of that background convention fuzz. If you guys have ever been to a convention, you know what I'm talking about. But there are some real gems in here, and I was very, very honored to have Larry give me 10 minutes of his time. So Larry, if you're hearing this, thank you so very much. I was really struck by how personal Larry approaches these characters. Not that I was surprised, I guess, because it's at the end of the day that's going to be that's G.I. Joe is going to be the lead in his story. But I really took away that these are his people. These are the people that he knows. He talks about it. You'll hear it. He talks about it. Scarlet is based on his wife, and these are the guys that he served with, and there was a real connection there. All these years that we've read the things that he's written and the file cards, and we've crafted our own tales of the Joe adventures and seeing the cartoons and this and that and all these different characterizations of them. It's like going right back to the core of it is the people that were in Larry's life. So I'm not sure if it's on the recording itself or if I believe he just said it to me right before we started recording. He's never seen an episode of the cartoon, or he doesn't follow them. Like he said he's never seen them. Obviously, I'll take him at his word. I imagine maybe he saw a glimpse of it and was like, "No, I'm out." But he's never seen an episode of the show. He says he doesn't watch the cartoons, doesn't follow any of the other comics that he doesn't write because they're not his people. So that's really fascinating to me. I'm forever grateful to Larry for giving me his time, and I hope you guys are going to enjoy this. And here we go with Larry Hama. Again, I've cleaned the audio up as much as I can. And hopefully you guys maybe crank up the volume a little bit. Larry's a soft-spoken gentleman, and I have a tendency to be very loud, so you hear me pretty clear. But I can't thank Larry enough, and enjoy stuff and things like that. Testing 1 2, testing 1 2.
Is that what brought you into the comic show?
It is, yeah. G.I. Joe absolutely was.
It was a gateway drug.
More people tell me that than not. Dudes
Really?
my age, absolutely. Guys my age are like, oh yeah, even if they're not reading comics today, they're like, G.I. Joe is it. So we're here with Larry Hama at Wondercon, and everyone who's listening, you know who Larry is. He's the godfather of G.I. Joe. Larry, how does it feel to still be doing Joe after all these years?
Like going home.
Yeah.
Feels like I never left, you know? I mean, because the characters are all people I know, so if they've evolved in that same way.
They really have. So recently you killed Snake Eyes, then we brought Snake Eyes back, and Dawn is proving to be a very cool character. What do you find most enjoyable about creating her?
Well, she brings a whole other aspect to the character. Plus, by having his memories implanted in her, she becomes a vehicle for all the untold stories. Mm-hmm. Because Snake Eyes couldn't tell them, right? But she can. I think it's the best for me. It's the best of all possible worlds. Just because a character dies, doesn't mean that you can't have more stories. There's lots of stuff that you read that the character's dead, but you still read it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like why the New Testament.
True.
I mean, you don't not read that because you know how it ends.
Make a very, very good point. What would be your favorite character to write over all these years? Is it Snake Eyes or is it?
I like Snake Eyes and Scarlet.
Yeah.
Those are the characters I like.
You're a writer, but as we're sitting here, you're penciling. Of course, you penciled the silent issue. You're a very talented artist. You've also acted. You were on MASH back in the day.
Uh-huh.
What do you like to do best?
Play rock and roll.
Really? What do you do? Do you play guitar? What do you do?
Yeah, I play guitar. I played in a band for 25 years.
What was the name of the band?
Chaotix. K-O-T-I-C-S.
What kind of music?
Blues-based rock and roll. Yeah, we had a horn section.
It's the best answer ever.
There's videos on YouTube. Just do a search for Chaotix CBGBs.
Oh,
they were,
great.
We had video from gigs at CBGBs during peak years in the early 90s. We played all the local New York clubs. We played CB's, Irving Plaza, Danceteria, downtown Beirut.
And still playing today?
Well,
as much as time permits?
We really don't play out anymore. Get together once in a while.
Cool. So one of the things we've been doing lately is looking at the early issues of the Joe issues, the Joe comic itself, and it seems to me like when this is just a supposition, hoping you can clarify either way. When you guys first started doing it, were you on for the long haul initially, or was it kind of start and stop? Because it feels like it took a few issues to get into like the mythology of it.
At the very beginning?
Yeah, at the very, very, very beginning, yeah.
Well, back then, it was just assumed that a licensed book wasn't going to run more than 2 years. There weren't that many that ran 1 year. And licensed books were the bottom of the barrel as far as the creators were concerned. no A-list talent would work on the license books because the licensing fee came right off the top. Paid so they paid the lowest rates, and nobody wanted to do that, so they made it rough.
So do you remember at one point when it finally you realized maybe that, hey, I'm here for the long haul, or the book is, let's start building these long-term mythology stories, like digging into Snake Eyes' origins and things like that?
Well, no matter what the project is, I never quit a book.
Yeah.
They have to pry it from my cold dead fingers. I think the first inkling we got was that at the 3-year mark, Hasbro was ready to bail. Because nobody wanted to take the risk of being stuck with warehouses full of Cabbage Patch dolls. And then they decided to take a chance. And then that's, and it just kept on going. And that was the first time that had happened. And then the Transformers happened, and stuff like that. So it changed the entire way that everybody approached all this stuff. Because the success of the G.I. Joe and Transformers was at the same time as the companies began to pay royalties. So all of a sudden, to really do well, doing a licensed book, that had never happened before. So all of a sudden, you got lots of better people wanting to do this stuff, and
Oh, well, Larry, that's awesome. You've been more than generous and gracious. So we're gonna sign off here. Is there anything about G.I. Joe that you would want fans to know about that maybe people don't ask you, or any final thought or comment on it?
They're all my friends. That's why. The whole thing about G.I. Joe is that it's not a military fantasy. It's a fantasy about camaraderie, and it's a fantasy about loyalty. And I've said it a billion times. It's really the junior woodchucks and guns. Either as easy as one. I can't remember plots. I'm not interested in plots. Most writers are. I'm not a writer. I'm a drawer. So I just concentrate on the characters. And I nail the characters by basing them on people I know. That way, they're really consistent. That's why I've never been able to watch the TV show or the animation or read the G.I. Joe material written by other people, because they don't know my friends. They don't know my cousin. They don't know the guys I served with. So they get it all wrong. I mean, it bothers me. I look at it and go, Jesus, it's not right. The personality of Scarlet is based on my mind. That's how I keep these characters really consistent. They don't waver, and the verisimilitude is there. They seem like real people because they are real people. They're real people to me. And as long as I am involved in fantasy and enjoy the fantasy, that's what we used to call the Tinkerbell syndrome in Peter Pan. That Barry said that if you stop believing in fairies, somewhere out there, some fairy drops dead. So, as long as that I believe. Look, there's all these writers and artists out there that just are doing it for the buck. They're not emotionally invested in the characters. They may be really good at what they do, but there's something missing. And that's all I have to say.
Larry,
Okay.
Larry Hama, thank you so much. We appreciate it. We appreciate everything you've done for G.I. Joe, and this is amazing. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
And that's it. I hope you enjoyed hearing that interview as much as I did in conducting the interview. I try to get out as much convention fuzz out of it as possible. Again, thank you, Larry Hama. What a generous guy and what a talent. I love what he had to say about his friends and his the people that he grew up with, and his take on his approach to writing. And go out there and find his band, Chaotix. Let's check them out on YouTube. Let's start sharing those links. Let's get them out there. So thanks again for listening to this interview, guys. I hope you enjoyed it.